Hampshire, March 1818. The drawing room at Courtenay Hall possessed a silence that was not merely the absence of noise. It was a heavy, suffocating weight, pressing against the damask wallpaper and settling into the velvet of the furniture like dust. The room carried the scent of beeswax and dying roses. Their petals were brown and curled at the edges, crumbling onto the mahogany surfaces, much like everything else in the house since the Earl of Courtenay had collapsed in this very room 8 months prior. Lady Diana Courtenay stood before the tall sash window. Her fingers were pressed against the cold glass, the condensation chilling her skin. She watched the relentless March rain blur the world outside. The gardens, which her father had once tended with the devotion of a man who found God in the intricate veins of a leaf, were now surrendering to the mud. Weeds choked the gravel paths. The prize rose bushes were overgrown, their thorns unchecked, clawing at the grey sky. At 23 years of age, Diana knew precisely what she had become in the eyes of the world, and more specifically, in the eyes of her stepmother. She was no longer the cherished daughter of a peer. She was a burden, an inconvenience, a ledger entry in red ink. She was a commodity to be exchanged to settle debts before she reached the age of 25 and claimed the small independence her grandmother had left her. The estate itself was trapped in legal limbo, passed technically to a distant cousin who was currently abroad in Italy and content to let the widow remain in residence. But the soul of the house was vanishing day by day. A painting sold here, a silver service missing there. The library shelves, once bursting with knowledge, now displayed gap-toothed smiles, where the most valuable volumes had been pulled and crated for auction. The sound of sharp heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor of the hallway announced Mrs. Lydia Courtenay's approach. It was a sound Diana had learned to dread more than thunder. Diana felt her spine straighten instinctively. She pulled her shoulders back, locking her knees, preparing her body and spirit for whatever fresh cruelty the day would bring. If stories of resilience and love against impossible odds touch your heart, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. The double doors opened. Lydia swept into the room, bringing with her a draught of cold air and the cloying scent of lavender water. At 38, the widow cut a striking figure. She was dressed in lavender silk, a calculated choice. It was a shade that suggested she was still in mourning, thus garnering sympathy, while being fashionable enough to allow her to attend social events without criticism. "Still wasting time at that window, I see," Lydia said. Her voice carried the particular edge that meant she was already displeased, likely by a bill or a servant's error. She moved to the center of the room, stripping off her gloves with sharp, jerking movements. "It is a habit of yours, this staring at nothing. It suggests a vacuous mind, Diana. People will talk." Diana turned slowly from the window. She kept her face impassive, a mask she had perfected over months of practice. "I was merely observing the garden, madam. The storm seems to be worsening." "The garden is a mud pit," Lydia dismissed, tossing her gloves onto a side table where a priceless Ming vase had stood only a week ago. "We leave for Lady Harrington's Musicale in 2 hours. I trust you recall our discussion about Mr. Reginald Moss." Diana felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "I recall you informing me that you have accepted an offer on my behalf without my consent." "Your consent," Lydia repeated. She tasted the word as if it were sour wine, spitting it out with contempt. "How quaint. You seem to have forgotten the legal realities of your situation. I am your legal guardian until you reach 25. That is 2 more years, Diana. 2 years during which every decision regarding your future, your residence and your marriage rests entirely with me." The reminder landed like a physical blow, as Lydia had intended. Diana's father had died intestate, his heart failing him too suddenly for proper arrangements to be finalized. The guardianship of his unmarried daughter had fallen automatically to his widow, a widow who had wasted no time in systematically dismantling everything the Earl had built. "Mr. Moss is 50 years old," Diana said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. She clasped her hands in front of her to hide their trembling. "He has buried 3 wives already. He smells of stale tobacco and cheap brandy. He speaks of women as if we were livestock to be trained and bred." Lydia's laugh was sharp and bright, echoing off the bare walls. He is wealthy, my dear, exceedingly so. You turn your nose up at trade and industry, but Mr. Moss owns half the textile mills in the north, and he has generously agreed to settle my accumulated debts at the gaming tables. Lydia paused, letting the words hang in the air. She walked closer to Diana, her blue eyes hard as flint. A sum of nearly £5,000. That is the price of your hand, Diana. He is paying £5,000 for the privilege of marrying a girl who, let us be honest, has little else to recommend her. You are too tall, you are too old, you are too opinionated. You should be grateful he is willing to take you at all. Diana felt the familiar sting of tears and blinked them back furiously. She would not give Lydia the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not today. I am my father's daughter, she said, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. I have his mind, I have his love of botany and natural sciences. The Royal Society published 3 of my papers under the name D. Court. I have value beyond a marriage market transaction. Had, Lydia corrected. She turned and walked to the walnut writing desk in the corner. She opened the top drawer and extracted a bundle of letters tied with rough twine. Diana's heart stopped. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was her own draft script, along with the replies from Professor Grimley in London. Past tense, darling, Lydia said, turning back with a cruel smile. I found these hidden beneath the floorboards in your room. Correspondence with learned men, discussing pollination, discussing subjects far beyond a woman's sphere. It was quite disturbing, really, to see a young lady so obsessed with the reproductive habits of plants. It borders on the obscene. Those are mine, Diana whispered. She took an instinctive step forward, her hand reaching out. Please, those represent 2 years of work. That creates the foundation for a monograph on British orchids. Please, Lydia. Lydia walked to the large fireplace, where a log fire crackled against the chill of the afternoon. She stood there, dangling the letters over the flames. The firelight danced in her eyes, making her look momentarily demonic. You always thought you were so special, Lydia said softly. Just like your mother, the saintly first Countess. Edmund looked at me, but he saw her. For 10 years of marriage, he looked right through me and saw her ghost. He built that conservatory for her. He filled this house with her books. And you are just another reminder, another echo of the woman he actually loved. That is not true, Diana protested, though the pain of the statement cut deep. He respected you. He married you. He married me because he needed a hostess and a mother for his sullen child, Lydia spat. And now he is gone, and I am left with the debts and the daughter, but I will not be left with the embarrassment. She held the letters lower. The heat began to curl the edges of the paper. This is precisely the sort of unnatural behavior that makes you unsuitable for polite society, Lydia declared. Women do not correspond with the Royal Society. Women do not discuss botanical classification and microscopy. Women, she said, opening her fingers, know their place. Diana cried out as the bundle fell. The dry paper caught instantly. Diana rushed to the grate, falling to her knees on the hearth rug, but it was too late. The flames licked eagerly at the ink, turning her diagrams and notes into black ash. She watched the paper curl and blacken, each one representing hours of careful observation in the rain, detailed sketches made by candlelight, thoughtful analysis that had earned the respect of men who did not know she was a woman. Her life's work, consumed in moments. Diana stared at the fire until the last page crumbled into grey dust. Something inside her chest cracked. It was a physical sensation, a fissure running through the careful composure she had maintained for 8 months. She stood up slowly. She turned to face Lydia. She did not care anymore about consequences. You are cruel, she said, her voice barely audible but vibrating with intensity. You are small and cruel and vindictive. My father loved me. He encouraged my studies because he valued intellect over vanity. He would be horrified by what you have become. He would be ashamed to have his name attached to yours. Lydia's hand moved so quickly Diana barely saw it coming. The slap echoed through the silent room, sharp and final, like a pistol shot. Diana's head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned as if branded. Her eyes watered from the shock as much as the pain. She tasted copper in her mouth where her tooth had cut the inside of her cheek. Lydia stood breathing heavily, her hand still raised, her chest heaving. "Edmund is dead," she said coldly. "He cannot help you. He cannot save you. And you would do well to remember that I am all that stands between you and complete destitution. I could throw you out into the street tonight, Diana. I could leave you to starve." Lydia smoothed her silk skirts, regaining her icy composure as if the violence had never happened. "Now go upstairs. Wash your face. Put some powder on that mark. And dress for the musicale. Wear the grey gown, the one with the high neck. We want Mr. Moss to see you as the modest, biddable creature you will become. If you are late, I will sell your mother's harp next." Diana fled the room. She held her hand pressed to her burning cheek. She ran past the startled footman in the hall, up the sweeping staircase, and did not stop until she reached her bedchamber. Once inside, she locked the door. She dragged a heavy chair in front of it, as if a piece of furniture could keep out the reality of her life. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and finally allowed the tears to fall. 8 months. 8 months of watching Lydia sell her father's collections piece by piece. 8 months of seeing loyal servants, men and women, who had known Diana since she was a baby in a cradle, dismissed without references. 8 months of Lydia systematically erasing every trace of the Earl of Courtenay's warmth and generosity from his home. It was a systematic deconstruction of her history. First the portraits, then the books, then the scientific instruments, now her own words, and now this. Forced attendance at a social event for the express purpose of displaying her to a man who made her skin crawl, a man who had paid £5,000 to cover a gambling debt in exchange for a bride young enough to be his granddaughter. Diana pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door. She closed her eyes and thought, not for the first time, that death might be preferable to what lay ahead. If she were dead, she would be with her father. She would be free. But then a small spark of anger flared in her chest. It was the same spark that had driven her to climb trees to find specimens when she was told it was unladylike. The same spark that had made her write to the Royal Society when she was told science was for men. If she died, Lydia won. Diana stood up. She wiped her face. She walked to the wash basin and splashed cold water on her burning cheek. She looked at herself in the mirror. The red mark was fading, but the eyes staring back were hard. "I will not break," she whispered to the empty room. "I will not let her win." The grey gown Lydia had selected was hanging on the wardrobe door. It was made of a coarse, stiff bombazine that scratched the skin. It was intentionally unflattering. The high neckline made Diana's slender throat disappear. The colour was a dull, lifeless slate that leached the warmth from her complexion. Diana put it on. She felt like a prisoner donning a uniform. She smoothed the fabric over her hips. In the looking glass, she appeared washed out, insignificant. A shadow of a woman, precisely as Lydia intended. She reached for her jewellery box, intending to wear the small pearl locket that held her mother's miniature. It was the only piece of value she had left, but the box was empty. Diana froze. She searched the drawers. Nothing. Lydia had taken it. Diana stared at the empty velvet cushion where the locket should have been. A cold fury settled over her, colder than the rain outside. She did not cry this time. There were no tears left. There was only a resolve as hard as diamond. She walked out of her room, head high, ready to walk into the lion's den. The journey to Lady Harrington's estate took an hour. The carriage was stuffy, smelling of damp wool and Lydia's perfume. The rain hammered against the roof, drowning out the sound of the wheels on the road. Lydia sat across from Diana, examining her stepdaughter with critical eyes. She reached out and adjusted Diana's collar, her fingers cold and pinching. "Sit straighter," Lydia commanded. "You are slouching like a milkmaid. And stop fidgeting with your gloves. Nervousness is unattractive. It suggests guilt." Diana sat perfectly still. "I am not nervous, madam. I am nauseated." "Control yourself," Lydia snapped. "When Mr. Moss approaches, you will smile. You will be agreeable. You will listen to his stories about his mills and you will laugh at his jokes. Is that understood?" "I understand what you require," Diana said neutrally. "Good. Because if you embarrass me tonight, Diana, if you do anything to jeopardize this arrangement, I will ensure that your life becomes significantly more difficult. I will remove the books from your room. I will board up the window so you cannot see the garden. Do not test me. Diana looked out the window into the darkness. I believe you. Lady Harrington's estate, the Oaks, was a blaze of light in the rainy night. Carriages were lined up along the drive, depositing the cream of Hampshire society. Footmen in livery hurried back and forth with umbrellas, shielding satin shoes and silk turbans from the downpour. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of beeswax, expensive perfume, and roasting meats. The sound of a string quartet drifted from the main salon. It was a scene of comfort and privilege, a world Diana had once belonged to effortlessly, but which now felt like a foreign country. They surrendered their cloaks. Lydia pinched Diana's arm hard before they entered the ballroom. "Smile," she hissed. Diana pasted a smile on her face. It felt brittle, like it might crack and fall to the floor. The music room glowed with the light of 3 crystal chandeliers. It was filled with familiar faces, the vicar, the squire, the giggling Bennet sisters. But as Diana and Lydia entered, a ripple of silence seemed to spread outward from the doorway. Fans snapped open, heads leaned together, whispers began behind gloved hands. "There is the widow," Diana heard a matron whisper nearby. "And the girl. They say the debts are astronomical. Look at the girl's dress," another voice murmured. "So drab. Poor thing. She looks like a governess." Diana stood near a potted palm, making herself as inconspicuous as possible. She felt exposed, flayed open by their scrutiny. Lydia, by contrast, bloomed under the attention. She circulated through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting people who despised her but feared her sharp tongue too much to show it. It was then that Diana saw him. Mr. Reginald Moss stood near the refreshment table. He was a man who took up space, not just physically, but atmospherically. His considerable girth strained against a waistcoat of garish gold brocade. His thinning hair was slicked back with a pomade that caught the candlelight unpleasantly, making his scalp shine. As Diana watched, frozen in horror, he selected a cream cake from a silver platter. He consumed it in 2 large bites, crumbs falling onto his lapel. He wiped his sticky fingers on a fine linen handkerchief, then stuffed it into his pocket. His eyes scanned the room, predatory and assessing. Then they landed on Diana. He did not smile with warmth. He smiled with ownership. It was the look a man gives a horse he has just purchased, checking its teeth and flanks. Diana's stomach turned. Bile rose in her throat. She moved instinctively toward the terrace doors. She needed air. She needed to be anywhere but here. She took a step, then another, seeking escape. But Lydia was faster. Her hand closed around Diana's upper arm with painful force, her fingers digging into the muscle through the thin grey fabric. "Where do you think you are going?" Lydia whispered harshly, her voice a serpent's hiss in Diana's ear. "Mr. Moss is approaching. You will not run. Stand still." "Lydia, please," Diana begged, her voice shaking. "I cannot." "You can and you will," smiled Diana. "Now." Moss arrived. He brought with him a cloud of scents, stale cigar smoke, heavy musk, and the sour tang of wine. He stood too close, invading Diana's personal space. "Mrs. Courtenay," he boomed, his voice loud enough to turn heads nearby. "Enchanting as always. You outshine women half your age." Lydia preened. "You are too kind, Mr. Moss, and this must be the young lady we discussed." Moss turned his full attention to Diana. "Indeed, my stepdaughter, Lady Diana Courtenay," Lydia said. "Diana, Mr. Moss has been most eager to make your acquaintance." Moss reached out and took Diana's gloved hand. His palms were damp. He raised her hand to his lips, holding it far longer than propriety allowed. His breath was hot and wet against her knuckles. "Charming," he murmured. His small watery eyes traveled over her body, lingering on her chest, then her waist. It was a violation without touch. "Quite charming indeed. A little thin, perhaps, but we can feed you up. I do so appreciate youth and modesty in a wife. So much easier to mold, you understand." Diana pulled her hand free with a jerk. She could not help it. "I am not seeking a husband, Mr. Moss." Lydia gasped. Moss merely laughed. It was a phlegmy, unpleasant sound that rumbled in his chest. All young ladies say that initially. It is part of the game, is it not? Feigned reluctance. He took a step closer. But I assure you, my dear, I am quite skilled at managing feminine reluctance. I have been married 3 times, you see. I know the way of things. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Sadly, each wife succumbed to the rigors of childbirth. Weak constitutions, all of them. But looking at you, you have good hips, strong bones. I am confident that with proper discipline and a firm hand you will fare better. I need an heir, Lady Diana, and you need a home. The room seemed to tilt. The chandeliers spun overhead. 3 wives, all dead in childbirth. And he spoke of it as if discussing a breeding program for cattle. He was telling her to her face that he intended to use her until she broke or died. Panic, cold and primal, flooded Diana's veins. "Excuse me," she said, her voice strangled. "I need air." She pushed past Lydia's restraining hand. She ignored the gasp of the guests nearby. She picked up her skirts and fled. She ran through the terrace doors, bursting out into the March evening. The cold air hit her face like a slap, but it was welcome. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The garden was mercifully empty, lit only by torches that cast dancing shadows across the wet gravel paths. Diana ran to the stone balustrade and gripped the cold railing. She gulped the air, fighting the nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She shook violently, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The terrace doors opened behind her. Light spilled out onto the stones. Diana turned, hoping for a sympathetic guest, perhaps Mrs. Harrington coming to check on her. But it was Lydia. And she was not sympathetic. Her face was twisted with a fury so pure it looked painful. "How dare you?" Lydia said, her voice trembling with rage. She advanced down the steps, her heels clicking ominously on the stone. "How dare you embarrass me in front of Mr. Moss, in front of the entire county?" "He is a monster," Diana cried, backing away until her back hit the stone urn. "Did you hear him? He spoke of his dead wives as if they were broken tools. He wants a broodmare, Lydia, not a wife." "I do not care if he wants a court jester," Lydia shouted, abandoning all pretense of decorum. "I have negotiated this arrangement for months. £5,000, Diana. Do you understand what that means? It means I can maintain my station. It means I can pay the vowels I signed in London. It means I can leave this god-forsaken house and return to society where I belong." "I will not marry him," Diana said. "I will not do it. I would rather die than let that man touch me." Lydia stopped 3 feet away. Her eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps you should die. It would certainly be cheaper." She took another step. "But since you are alive, you will do as you are told. Or do you think anyone would question it if you were committed to an asylum? Dr. Grimshaw has already prepared the necessary documents. He has been paid very well to certify that you are prone to hysteria and delusions. 1 word from me, Diana. 1 word, and you will spend the rest of your days in a cell, drugged and forgotten. You will never see the sky again." Diana stared at her stepmother. She saw the truth in Lydia's eyes. It was not an idle threat. Lydia was desperate enough to destroy her completely. "You are insane," Diana whispered. Lydia's face contorted. Her hand rose. Diana flinched, bracing herself. The blow connected with brutal force. Lydia struck her across the face, putting the full weight of her frustration and hatred behind it. The sound echoed across the garden, louder than the rain. Diana stumbled, her ankle twisted on the uneven gravel. She fell hard to her knees, crying out as the stones cut into her skin. Her cheek burned with a fire that seemed to spread through her whole head. She tasted blood. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard gasps from the terrace. She looked up. Guests had spilled out onto the balcony, drawn by the shouting. They stood in the light of the doors, witnessing her complete humiliation. 40 members of Hampshire society watching the Earl's daughter beaten by her stepmother in the mud. Lydia stood over her, breathing hard. She raised her hand again. "Get up," Lydia hissed. "Get up and apologize." Diana closed her eyes. She waited for the second blow. She had no fight left. She was broken, but the blow never came. Instead, she heard a sharp intake of breath. a masculine exclamation, the sound of heavy boots crunching rapidly on gravel. "Do not," a voice said. It was low, deadly calm, and vibrated with a menace that made the air temperature drop 10 degrees. "Do not strike her again." Diana opened her eyes. A tall figure stood between her and Lydia. He was facing the older woman, his back to Diana. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in severe black evening wear. His hand was wrapped around Lydia's raised wrist, holding it in a grip that looked like iron. "That was your last mistake, Mrs. Courtenay," the man said. Diana looked up into the face of Lord Julian Pemberton, Viscount Aldridge. She felt something shift in the universe. She had not seen Julian in nearly 4 years. He had been away on the continent, serving with the diplomatic corps during the final years of the wars, and had only returned briefly for her father's funeral. On that day he had stood grave and silent beside the coffin, a remote figure of grief. Now he was here, and he was terrifying. At 35, Julian Pemberton was a commanding presence. He was well over 6 feet tall, towering over Lydia. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, a legacy of the stress of war. His eyes, usually the color of winter ice, were currently burning with a cold fire fixed on Lydia. Lydia went pale. She tried to pull her wrist free, but she might as well have tried to move a mountain. "Release me," Lydia demanded, though her voice wavered. "This is a family matter, Lord Aldridge. It does not concern you." "Release you?" Julian asked softly. "I think not." He turned his head slightly, raising his voice so it carried clearly to the terrace where the crowd stood frozen. "I watched from the terrace," Julian announced. "I saw everything, Mrs. Courtenay. I heard the threats. I saw the verbal abuse. I saw the physical assault. I heard the threat of false commitment to an asylum to cover your own debts, all witnessed by 40 members of Hampshire society." He released Lydia's wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. She nearly fell, catching herself on the stone urn. Julian turned to Diana. The transformation in his face was immediate. The rage vanished, replaced by a profound concern. He crouched down in the gravel, heedless of his fine trousers. "Are you hurt, Lady Diana?" Lady Diana. The use of her proper title was deliberate, a public acknowledgement of her status. Diana shook her head. She tried to speak, but only a sob came out. She nodded instead. Julian reached out. "May I?" She nodded again. He placed his hands on her arms and helped her to stand. Her ankle gave way, shooting pain up her leg. She gasped and stumbled. Julian caught her instantly. His arm went around her waist, supporting her weight completely. He held her steady, his body a solid wall of warmth against the cold night. He looked at her face. He saw the red mark blooming on her cheek. He saw the cut on her lip. He saw the terror in her eyes. His jaw tightened until a muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked back at the crowd on the terrace. "The Earl of Courtenay was my dearest friend," Julian said, his voice ringing out like a judgment. "On his deathbed, he made me promise to protect his daughter should anything happen to him. I was detained on the continent settling military affairs for 8 months, a delay I shall regret to my dying day. I failed him, but that failure ends tonight." He turned his gaze back to Lydia. She was clutching her wrist, looking from the crowd to Julian with panic rising in her eyes. "Lady Diana Courtenay will be removed from your guardianship immediately," Julian declared. "She will reside at Aldridge Manor under the protection of myself and my aunt, the Dowager Viscountess. Any attempt to contact her, any attempt to come near her, or any attempt to interfere with her welfare will be met with the full force of the law." "You have no right," Lydia shrieked. The mask of the elegant widow finally shattered completely. She looked wild, desperate. "I am her legal guardian. The courts granted me that authority. You cannot just take her." "The courts grant guardianship on the assumption that the guardian acts in the ward's best interest," Julian replied, his tone arctic. "What I have witnessed tonight demonstrates clearly that you have violated that sacred trust. You have treated a peer's daughter like a slave and sold her like cattle to cover your own vice." He took a step toward her. Lydia shrank back. "My solicitor will file with the Court of Chancery first thing Monday morning to strip you of your position," Julian continued. "And I believe, madam, that you are wearing the late Countess's pearl brooch." He pointed to the bodice of Lydia's dress. Diana gasped. She hadn't seen it in the dim light, but there it was, her mother's pearls. "That is mine," Lydia lied. "It was a gift." "It was worn by the late Countess in her portrait which hangs in the gallery," Julian said. "A portrait I have admired many times. You will return it. Now." Lydia froze. She looked at the crowd. She saw the disgust on their faces. She saw Lady Harrington shaking her head. She saw the magistrate, Sir Howard Blackwell, taking notes in a small book. She was ruined. And she knew it. With trembling fingers, Lydia unpinned the brooch. She held it out. Julian did not touch her hand. He held out his palm, and she dropped the brooch into it. He turned to Diana and gently pressed the brooch into her hand. "Yours, I believe?" Diana clutched the cold metal, tears finally spilling over. Julian turned to the terrace. "Mrs. Harrington!" The hostess bustled down the stairs, looking horrified. "Lord Aldridge, oh my dear Diana!" "Please take Lady Diana inside," Julian requested gently. "Provide her with a private room where she can rest and attend to her injuries. I will have her belongings collected from Courtenay Hall tomorrow." Of course, Mrs. Harrington said. She put her arm around Diana. "Come with me, you poor dear." Diana allowed herself to be led away. She limped up the stairs, leaning on Mrs. Harrington. As they passed through the crowd on the terrace, the silence was absolute. But for once the eyes were not judging her poverty or her dress. They were filled with pity and shock, and as she crossed the threshold, she glanced back. Lydia was standing alone in the dark garden. The rain had started again. She looked small, wet, and utterly defeated. Julian stood at the top of the stairs, guarding the door, an impassable sentinel between Diana and her tormentor. The room Mrs. Harrington provided was a small guest bedchamber on the ground floor. It was warm, lit by a cheerful fire. Diana sank into a velvet armchair, her legs finally giving out. Mrs. Harrington sent for a maid with warm water, arnica for the bruising, and sweet tea. "I had no idea," Mrs. Harrington kept saying, fluttering around Diana like a distressed bird. "We heard rumors, of course, that things were difficult at the hall. But physical violence? And that business about Mr. Moss? It is monstrous." Diana sipped the tea, the sugar shocking her system. "I thought I would die in that house," she whispered. "I truly thought she would lock me away." "Reginald Moss," Mrs. Harrington said with a shudder. "Everyone knows about him. He drives his wives to early graves. He treats them like broodmares. The fact that Lydia would negotiate such a match, it tells us everything." There was a firm knock at the door. It opened before Mrs. Harrington could answer. A tall, imposing woman in her 70s swept into the room. She was dressed in deep blue silk that rustled with authority. She wore diamonds at her throat that were worth more than Courtenay Hall. She leaned on an ebony cane, not for support, but as a weapon of command. "The Dowager Viscountess Aldridge," Mrs. Harrington announced, dropping a deep curtsy. "Spare me the formalities, Elizabeth," the Dowager said briskly. Her sharp grey eyes that were identical to Julian's, fixed on Diana. "So this is Edmund's girl." She marched across the room and stood over Diana. "Stand up, child, let me look at you." Diana set down her tea. She pushed herself up, wincing as her ankle throbbed. She stood as tall as she could, lifting her chin. The Dowager studied her face. She looked at the red mark on her cheek. She looked at the cut lip. She looked at the grey bombazine dress. Then she looked into Diana's eyes. The older woman said after a long moment. "You have your father's eyes. Intelligent. Good. The Earl was one of the finest men I ever knew. Brilliant mind, generous heart. Wasted on that viper he married in his loneliness." She turned to Mrs. Harrington. "My nephew informs me that Lady Diana will be residing at Aldridge Manor effective immediately. I have come to collect her." "Tonight?" Diana asked, surprised. "My lady, I have no belongings, no clothes." "Clothes can be bought," the Dowager snapped. "Safety cannot. I do not trust Lydia Courtenay not to attempt some desperate action before Julian's solicitor can file the papers on Monday. If we leave you here, she might try to drag you back. You will leave Hampshire tonight. You will travel to Surrey under my protection." "Surrey is 3 hours away," Diana murmured. "Then we had best get started," the Dowager said. "Can you walk to the carriage?" "I can," Diana said. "Good girl." 5 minutes later, Diana found herself wrapped in a heavy fur cloak that smelled of lavender and cedar. She was seated in the most luxurious carriage she had ever seen. The seats were plush velvet. A warming pan had been placed on the floor for her feet. Julian stood by the open door. The rain was falling harder now. He looked at her, his face shadowed. "My aunt will travel with you," he said. "I will ride alongside the carriage. You are safe now, Diana." "Thank you," she said. It seemed inadequate. "Lord Aldridge, Julian," he corrected gently. "Please, given the circumstances." "Julian," she tested the name. "Thank you." He nodded, closed the door, and the carriage lurched into motion. The journey was long and dark. The rhythmic rocking of the carriage was soothing, but Diana was too wired to sleep. Across from her, the dowager sat upright, watching her. "My nephew tells me you have a mind for science," the dowager said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Much like your father. Is this true or merely a fond exaggeration of a grieving friend?" Diana hesitated. She had learned to hide her intelligence. Lydia had mocked it. Society had shunned it. I have studied botany, my lady. My father taught me, and I read Latin fluently." The dowager raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Latin? Tell me, child, what is your opinion on the classification system of Linnaeus versus the natural method of Jussieu?" Diana blinked. It was a specific technical question. A test. She sat up straighter. "Linnaeus offers order and clarity, certainly. His sexual system allows for easy identification, but it is artificial. Jussieu's natural method allows for a deeper understanding of the relationships between families. It groups plants by their true affinities. It is less rigid, more organic, more true to nature's design." The dowager stared at her. Then, a small, approving smile touched her thin lips. "Correct," the dowager said. "You are not merely a decorative ornament, then." "Good. Aldridge Manor has no patience for empty-headed girls. We value intellect. You will fit in well." Diana felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the furs. It was validation. "Now," the dowager commanded, "tell me everything. Leave nothing out. I need to know precisely what we are dealing with regarding your stepmother." So, in the darkness of the carriage, Diana talked. She told the dowager about the isolation, the selling of the heirlooms, the gambling debts, the threats, the burning of the letters. By the time she finished, the dowager looked ready to commit murder. "That woman will pay," the dowager said quietly, "not just legally, but socially. By the time I am finished, Lydia Courtenay will be persona non grata in every drawing room from Hampshire to Edinburgh." The carriage slowed. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels. "We have arrived," the dowager announced. Aldridge Manor appeared through the early morning mist like something from a dream. It was massive, a Palladian masterpiece of honey-colored stone that seemed to glow in the grey dawn light. It was surrounded by manicured gardens that stretched toward distant woods. Julian was there to open the door. He must have ridden ahead. He looked tired, his evening clothes damp, but his hand was steady as he helped Diana down. "Welcome to Aldridge Manor, Lady Diana," he said. Diana looked up at the house. It looked solid, safe. "Come," the dowager said. "Bed, immediately." Diana was ushered inside by a sleepy but efficient butler. She was led up a grand staircase, down a long gallery lined with portraits, to a suite of rooms. "These were my mother's rooms," Julian said quietly at the door. "I hope you will be comfortable." "They are beautiful," Diana said, though she could barely keep her eyes open. A maid appeared, bobbing a curtsy. She helped Diana strip off the hated grey dress. She brought warm water to wash away the blood and the dirt. She dressed Diana in a soft nightgown that smelled of fresh linen. Diana climbed into the massive four-poster bed. The mattress swallowed her. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 8 months, she did not lock her door. She knew with absolute certainty that the man pacing the hallway outside would let no harm come to her. She slept. Diana woke to the sensation of warmth. It was a foreign feeling. For months she had woken to the damp chill of a room where the fire was never lit to save money, and the dread of what the day would bring. But this warmth was substantial. It was sunlight streaming through heavy velvet curtains. It was the weight of a down comforter. It was the crackle of a fire that had been freshly stoked by an unseen hand. She lay still for a moment, her heart racing in a panic of confusion. Where was she? Why was the ceiling painted with cherubs? Then memory returned in a rush. The musical, the garden, the blow, Julian, Aldridge Manor. She was safe. She sat up slowly. Her body ached. Her ankle throbbed with a dull rhythm, and her cheek felt stiff and tender. She touched her face and winced. The bruise would be spectacular. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of a young maid carrying a heavy silver tray. The girl looked to be about Diana's age, with bright, intelligent eyes and a crisp uniform. "Good afternoon, my lady," the girl said, bobbing a curtsy. "I am Mary. The housekeeper assigned me to assist you during your stay. I trust you slept well?" Diana glanced at the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. "Afternoon, surely not." "It is 1:30, my lady," Mary said with a smile, setting the tray on a small table. "Her ladyship the Dowager gave strict instructions that you were not to be disturbed until you woke of your own accord. She said, and I quote, 'The girl needs sleep more than she needs luncheon.'" Diana sank back against the pillows. She had slept for 12 hours. It felt indulgent, almost sinful. "I have brought tea, fresh bread, butter and apricot preserves," Mary said, pouring a steaming cup. "Her ladyship requested I inform you that the family will be gathering in the morning room at 2 o'clock to discuss correspondence, should you feel up to joining them." "I would be delighted," Diana said, her voice hoarse. She took the cup Mary offered. The china was so thin it was translucent. "Though I fear I have nothing to wear, I arrived with nothing but the clothes on my back and, well, that dress is ruined." "Her ladyship anticipated as much," Mary said efficiently. She moved to the large wardrobe and threw open the doors. Inside hung a row of gowns. They were not new, clearly, but they were made of exquisite fabrics, silks, muslins and lawns in shades of blue, cream and soft rose. "These belong to the Dowager's daughter, who is now married and living in Vienna," Mary explained. "She was of a similar height to you, my lady. I've taken the liberty of pressing the blue muslin. It has a slightly higher waist which should be comfortable, and the colour will suit you." Diana looked at the dress. It was simple but elegant, the fabric light and airy. It was the colour of a summer sky. It was the opposite of the hateful grey bombazine. "Thank you, Mary," Diana said softly. "Truly." 2 hours later, Diana descended the grand staircase. She moved slowly, favouring her left ankle, her hand gripping the polished mahogany banister. The house was magnificent. It was not just grand, it was lived in. There were fresh flowers in vases on every surface. There were dogs sleeping on rugs. It felt like a home, not a museum. Julian waited at the bottom of the stairs. He was dressed in a dark blue coat that mirrored the colour of her borrowed dress. He was reading a letter, his brow furrowed, but he looked up at the sound of her approach. His expression froze. His grey eyes swept over her, taking in the blue dress. The way her hair had been softly arranged by Mary to shadow the bruise on her cheek, the straightness of her spine despite her injury. Something warm and dangerous bloomed in his eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a gentleman's polite mask, but Diana had seen it. Her breath hitched. "Lady Diana," he said, bowing. "You look restored." "I feel it," she replied, reaching the bottom step. "Thanks to your hospitality and your aunt's wardrobe." He offered his arm. It was a formal gesture, but the heat of his muscles beneath the fine wool of his coat was distracting. "My aunt has been pacing like a general preparing for battle. She is most eager to discuss strategy." "Strategy?" Diana asked as they walked through the marble-floored entrance hall toward the back of the house. "For destroying Lydia Courtenay utterly and completely," Julian replied. There was a hint of dark amusement in his voice. "My aunt was a formidable political hostess in her youth. When she decides to ruin someone socially, she does so with the precision of a military campaign. She has already drafted 3 letters to the patronesses of Almack's." The morning room was a cheerful space overlooking the south lawn. It was filled with spring light that mercilessly illuminated the piles of paper covering the central table. The dowager sat at the head, looking like a queen holding court. "Excellent, you are awake," she said briskly as Diana and Julian entered. "Sit, eat. We have much to discuss. Your stepmother made her first move this morning. A messenger arrived from Courtney Hall an hour ago." Diana felt her stomach drop. The peace of the morning evaporated. "What has she done?" The dowager selected a letter from the pile. She held it by the corner, as if it were contaminated. "She has written to every family of consequence in Hampshire, including the Lord Lieutenant. She claims that you suffered a nervous collapse due to hysteria at Lady Harrington's Musicale. She asserts that you were delusional, shouting nonsense, and that my nephew abducted you while you were in a state of mental distress." "That is a lie," Diana exclaimed, gripping the edge of the table. "A complete fabrication." "Obviously," the dowager said dryly. "However, she is clever. She frames it as concern. She claims she fears for your virtue and your safety. And, most worryingly, she has included a statement from a Dr. Silas Grimshaw." Julian pulled out a chair for Diana. "Sit down, Diana. You look pale." Diana sat. "Dr. Grimshaw. Lydia threatened me with him. She said he had papers prepared to commit me to an asylum." "He has done more than prepare papers," Julian said grimly. He picked up a document. "He has provided a sworn affidavit stating that he has attended you on 3 separate occasions for fits of mania and unnatural obsessions. He recommends immediate confinement for your own protection." Julian's hand slammed down on the table. The teacups rattled. "I will not allow that woman to win. I will not allow her to paint you as mad to cover her own crimes." "Nor will I," the dowager said calmly, "which is why we are going to war, my dear boy. But in war one must know the terrain. Diana, I need you to be precise. Have you ever met this Dr. Grimshaw?" "Never," Diana said firmly. "I have never seen him. I have never spoken to him." "Good," the dowager said. "Then he is vulnerable. Now I need you to tell me everything about your father's estate. Lydia claims there was no will. Is this consistent with the Earl's character?" Diana shook her head slowly. "No, my father was meticulous. He catalogued every book in his library. He kept detailed journals of rainfall and temperature for 20 years. The idea that he would die without a will, leaving me to the mercy of a woman he knew was spendthrift. It is impossible." "Explain," Julian said, leaning forward. "Why do you say he knew she was spendthrift?" "Because they argued about it," Diana said, a memory surfacing. 2 weeks before he died. I heard them in the study. Lydia wanted to sell a piece of land to pay for a season in London. My father refused. He shouted that he had secured the girl's future and that Lydia would not touch a penny of the trust. The dowager and Julian exchanged a significant glance. "He said secured the girl's future?" Julian asked intently. "Those exact words?" "Yes," Diana confirmed. "And later that night, I saw him sealing a thick envelope with blue wax. He usually used red. He put it in his travel writing slope, the one he took to London, but when he died, the slope was empty." "Blue wax," the dowager mused. "That is the colour used by his London solicitors, Hemsley and Throckmorton." "Then there is a will," Julian said, a savage satisfaction in his voice. "And Lydia destroyed it. Or hid it," the dowager corrected. "If she destroyed a registered will, the solicitors would have a copy. The fact that Hemsley and Throckmorton have not come forward suggests that she got to them first," Julian finished, "or she bribed a clerk to alter the records. We need proof," the dowager said. "Julian, you must go to London, visit the solicitors, demand to see the records. Diana and I will remain here and gather evidence from the local staff. We will find every servant Lydia dismissed. We will build a chorus of voices that will drown out her lies." The days that followed fell into a routine that was both terrifying and comforting. Julian departed for London, leaving the manor feeling strangely empty. Diana spent her mornings with the dowager, writing letters and interviewing former servants of Courtney Hall who came to Aldridge Manor, eager to help the Earl's girl. But in the afternoons, the dowager insisted Diana rest. Diana found her sanctuary in the library. It was a magnificent room, 2 stories high, smelling of leather and old paper. It reminded her so painfully of her father that the first time she entered, She had wept. But soon, it became a comfort. It was there, or rather in the attached conservatory, that Julian found her upon his return 5 days later. Diana was in the greenhouse, surrounded by the humid warmth and the earthy smell of moss. She was sketching a Cattleya orchid, examining the way the purple lip of the flower curled to invite a pollinator. She was so absorbed she did not hear the door open. "The structure is fascinating, is it not?" Diana jumped, nearly dropping her charcoal. She spun around. Julian stood there. He looked tired, dust on his riding boots, his cravat slightly loosened. But his eyes were bright. "Lord Aldridge," she stammered. "Julian, you are back." "I am," he said. He walked closer, ignoring the propriety that said they should not be alone. He looked at her drawing. "My late wife, Caroline, loved this plant. Cattleya trianae. She brought it back from a trip to the Americas before the war. She used to say it was like a secret waiting to be told." Diana looked at the flower, then at Julian. "It is waiting," she said softly. "It is waiting for the specific bee that knows how to unlock it. Without that connection, it remains dormant forever." Julian looked at her. The air in the greenhouse seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden, intense awareness. He was standing close enough that she could smell the scent of the road on him, horses, rain, and leather. "Dormant," he repeated softly. "Yes, I know that feeling well." He reached out. His hand hovered near her arm, then settled on her elbow. His touch was warm, searing through the thin muslin of her sleeve. "I found something in London, Diana," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I spoke to the senior partner at Hemsley. He was shocked to hear your father had died interstate. He remembered drawing up a will 3 years ago, but the copy in their vault was missing, replaced by a blank ledger page." "Then it is hopeless," Diana whispered, her heart sinking. "No," Julian said. He took a step closer. "Because the clerk who manages the vault has suddenly come into a great deal of money. He bought a tavern in Cheapside 2 days after your father died. We have him, Diana. My solicitor is applying pressure. He will crack." "You did all that?" she asked, searching his face. The harsh lines of the ice Viscount seemed to have softened. "For me, I would dismantle London brick by brick for you," he said. The confession hung between them, raw and undeniable. Diana felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing her toward him. She saw his gaze drop to her lips, then flick back up to her eyes, dark with desire. "Julian," she breathed. He leaned in. His hand slid up her arm to cup her shoulder. The door to the greenhouse banged open. "My lord!" It was the butler, breathless. "The magistrate is here, Sir Howard Blackwell, and he has Dr. Grimshaw with him." Julian pulled back, the mask of the Ice Viscount slamming back into place instantly. "Grimshaw here?" "Yes, my lord. They are in the drawing room. They are demanding to see Lady Diana." "Over my dead body," Julian growled. He turned to Diana. "Stay here." "No," Diana said. She put her hand on his arm. "No, Julian. I am done hiding. I am done being spoken for. I will face him." Julian looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine. He nodded once. "Then we face him together." They walked into the drawing room side by side. Sir Howard Blackwell looked uncomfortable. Beside him sat a man who could only be Dr. Grimshaw. He was thin, with nervous hands and shifting eyes that refused to settle on anything. "Lord Aldridge," Sir Howard said, rising. "Lady Diana, I apologize for the intrusion, but Dr. Grimshaw has sworn a complaint before the bench. He insists he must examine the patient to verify her mental state." "I am not a patient," Diana said clearly, her voice steady, "and this man is a stranger to me." "Come now, my dear," Dr. Grimshaw said, his voice oily. "Your memory is affected by your condition. We met on January 14th, and again on February 3rd. You were quite distressed." Julian crossed his arms. "January 14th, he repeated. "You are certain of that date?" "Absolutely, my lord," Grimshaw said, tapping a notebook. "I have it recorded here." Diana stepped forward. "On January 14th, I was in London," she said. I was staying at my father's townhouse in Mayfair. I spent the entire afternoon at Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly. I purchased a copy of Persuasion. Mr. Nathaniel Shaw, the proprietor, sat with me and discussed the ending for 20 minutes. He shipped the book to Courtney Hall the next day. The receipt is in my father's ledger. Grimshaw blinked. Perhaps I have the date wrong. And February 3rd, Julian pressed, advancing on the doctor like a predator. Yes, February 3rd, Grimshaw insisted, at Courtney Hall. February 3rd was the day of Lord Waverley's funeral, Diana said. I was at the church in the village from 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I sat with the vicar's wife. I helped serve the funeral tea. 50 people saw me there. Were you at the funeral, Dr. Grimshaw? No, the doctor stammered. Sweat broke out on his forehead. Sir Howard, Julian said, turning to the magistrate, it seems we have a conflict of evidence. On one hand, the sworn word of an earl's daughter supported by receipts and half the village. On the other, the word of a man who claims to have treated a patient who was visibly elsewhere. Julian picked up a piece of paper from the table. Also, my solicitors in London did some checking. It appears a Dr. Silas Grimshaw had his license revoked by the College of Physicians in 1816 for overprescribing laudanum. Is that you, sir? Or merely a namesake? Grimshaw turned a sickly shade of green. He stood up abruptly. I see there has been a misunderstanding. I must check my records. Good day. He tried to bolt for the door. Sit down, Sir Howard barked. The magistrate's kindly demeanour had vanished. You will not leave this house, sir. You will explain to me exactly why you have sworn a false oath before a magistrate, and you will tell me exactly how much Lydia Courtney paid you to do it. The road to the Court of Chancery was paved with these small victories, but the final battle took place in London 3 weeks later. The courtroom was stiflingly hot, packed with spectators drawn by the scandal. Lydia sat at the defendant's table. She looked thinner, her face drawn, but her eyes were still burning with defiance. The Lord Chancellor, a man with a face like carved granite, presided. The proceedings were brutal. Lydia's solicitor tried to paint Julian as a predator who had abducted a vulnerable heiress. He spoke of Diana's instability. But then Julian's counsel called the witness, Mr. Percival Throom, the clerk from the solicitor's office. The little man took the stand, shaking. Under the relentless questioning of Julian's barrister, he crumbled. He admitted to taking £50 from Lydia to burn the will in the vault. He admitted to forging the entry in the ledger. And then he produced a second copy. I did not burn it, my lords, Throom whispered. I was afraid. If the Earl's ghost came back, so I kept it, hidden in my lodgings. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The Lord Chancellor took the document. He read it in silence. Then he looked at Lydia. This court finds, he boomed, that the late Earl of Courtney did indeed leave a valid will. A will that places his entire estate in trust for his daughter, Lady Diana, until her 25th birthday, or her marriage, whichever comes first. It provides Mrs. Courtney with a modest annuity contingent on her good behaviour. He lowered the paper. Mrs. Courtney, you have attempted to subvert the law, defraud a minor, and imprison a peer's daughter. You are stripped of your guardianship immediately. You are remanded to custody to await trial for fraud and forgery. No, Lydia screamed as the bailiffs moved toward her. It is a lie. She is mad. She is useless. Diana watched her stepmother being led away. She felt no triumph. She felt no joy. She simply felt a heavy weight lift from her shoulders, leaving her light enough to float. Julian's hand found hers under the table. He squeezed it hard. It is over, he said. Yes, Diana whispered. The nightmare has ended. But the true ending, or rather the beginning, came months later. September brought a chill to the air of London, but inside the Royal Society the atmosphere was electric. Diana sat in the gallery, her hands gripping the velvet railing. She was dressed in a gown of shimmering emerald silk. It was bold, it was vibrant, it was alive. Below her, on the podium where only men were allowed to stand, Julian stood. He looked magnificent in formal evening wear. He held her paper in his hands. He began to read. His voice was clear, projecting to the back of the hall. He read her words about the Cattleya orchid. He described her methodology. He detailed her discovery of the symbiotic relationship between the flower and the moth. He did not pretend the words were his. As Lady Diana Courtenay observed, he said repeatedly, as her research demonstrates. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the applause began. It started as a ripple and grew to a roar. Men stood up. They clapped. They looked up at the gallery. Julian did not bow. He turned and pointed to her. Diana stood up. She looked down at the sea of faces. She saw respect. She looked at Julian. He was looking at her with an expression of such naked pride and adoration that it took her breath away. Later that night at the reception, they slipped away to the terrace. The noise of the party faded behind the glass doors. "You were extraordinary," Julian said. "They are calling you a genius. Professor Grimley wants to publish the paper next month, under your name." "Under my name," Diana repeated. She leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out at the lights of London. "I never thought I would see this day." "You earned it," Julian said. He moved closer. "You fought for it." "I had help," she said. She turned to face him. "Julian, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I am grateful," she began. "For the rescue, for the protection, for tonight." Julian's face fell slightly. "Gratitude, of course." "No," she said, stepping closer. "Let me finish. I am grateful. But that is not why I am standing here. I am not standing here because you are my hero. I am standing here because you are the only man I have ever met who sees me. You saw the scientist when everyone else saw a spinster. You saw the strength when everyone else saw a victim." She reached up and touched his face. His skin was warm under her fingers. "I do not love you because you saved me, Julian," she whispered. "I love you because you understood why I needed saving. I love you because you are brilliant and kind, and you thaw when you look at me. I choose you, not out of debt, but out of love." Julian let out a breath that sounded like a broken sob. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "Diana," he murmured against her skin. "My God, Diana. I have loved you since the moment you quoted Jussieu in the carriage. I have loved you every minute of every day." He pulled back. He framed her face with his hands. "Marry me," he said. "Be my wife. Be my partner. Write your papers in my library. Grow your orchids in my greenhouse. Just be with me." "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then. It was not a tentative kiss. It was a promise. It was the sealing of a contract between two souls who had found their equal in the dark, 5 years later. The morning sun filtered through the glass panes of the Aldridge Manor greenhouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the humid air. The smell of damp earth and blooming vanilla was thick and sweet. Diana stood at a potting bench, her hands covered in rich, dark soil. She was examining a new shoot on a delicate orchid, a hybrid she had spent 3 years cultivating. "Mama, Mama, look!" Diana turned. A small boy of 4 with dark curls and grey eyes came running down the aisle between the ferns. He was clutching a magnifying glass in one hand and a jar in the other. Julian walked a few paces behind him, a look of indulgent pride on his face. He was carrying a stack of books. "What is it, Thomas?" Diana asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I found a beetle," Thomas announced solemnly. "Papa says it is a... He looked to his father for help. "Coleoptera," Julian supplied, resting his hand on the boy's head. "A coleoptera," Thomas repeated triumphantly. "Can we draw it in your big book?" Diana laughed. The sound was bright and free, echoing off the glass walls. "We certainly can. But first, you must put it back where you found it. We observe, Thomas. We do not imprison." Thomas nodded seriously and ran off to return the beetle. Diana looked up at Julian. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He dropped a kiss on her forehead. "Lydia wrote again," he said softly, "from the cottage in Scotland." "Did she?" Diana asked. She felt nothing, no fear, no anger, just a distant pity. "What did she want?" "Money, an invitation." Julian shrugged. "I burned it." "Good," Diana said. She turned back to her orchid. Look, Julian, it's blooming. The cross-pollination worked. Julian looked at the flower. Then he looked at his wife. He looked at the life they had built on the ashes of her pain. It is perfect, he said. Yes, Diana agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder as their son ran back to them, laughing in the sunlight. It is. Justice had been served, love had conquered, and the woman who had been raised to believe she was nothing had proved to the world, and more importantly to herself, that she was everything. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope.